The sorrel mare stepped into a prairie dog hole and stumbled, throwing Rip Campbell hard against the saddle horn. He pulled up, cursing the animal and the luck that put holes where horses needed solid ground. "Easy, Molly." He swung down and lifted her left foreleg, running his thumb along the fetlock. No swelling, but she favored it when he set her hoof down. Just my goddamn luck. The sun hammered the Texas plains like a blacksmith working iron. Rip pulled his hat brim lower and squinted toward the horizon, where heat devils danced over scrub brush and red dirt. Fort Worth lay 2 days north, maybe 3 if Molly kept favoring that leg. The cattle buyer expected him Thursday. Today was Tuesday. He walked Molly in a tight circle. She stepped gingerly but took weight on all 4 legs. "Could be worse," he told her. "Could be buzzard bait out here." A dust plume rose in the distance, too small for a herd, too steady for wind. Rip shaded his eyes. Single rider, coming fast from the east. He checked his colt, more habit than worry, and waited. The rider pulled up 30 yards out, a Mexican kid on a paint horse, both of them lathered with sweat. "Senor, you headed for trouble?" "Trouble?" "The town." The kid pointed northwest. "Maybe 6 miles." Rip had ridden this country for 20 years and never heard of any town called Trouble. "What kind of town?" "The kind that needs a doctor real bad." The kid's horse danced sideways. "My sister, she's having her baby in Doc Henley. He's too drunk to deliver it." "I'm not a doctor." "You got supplies? Medicine? Anything?" Rip carried a bottle of laudanum and some bandages, the usual trail kit. "Some." "Please, senor. She's been laboring since yesterday." Rip looked at his mare, then at the kid whose sister might die while he stood here calculating miles and money. "Lead the way." They rode northwest across rolling prairie that gave way to red rock country cut with arroyos and mesquite thickets. The kid, Carlos, he said, talked non-stop about his sister Maria and her husband, who worked for the railroad, and how the baby was coming early, but the midwife had run off with a gambling man last month. There. Carlos pointed to a cluster of buildings huddled against a line of cottonwoods. Trouble. The town looked like it had been thrown together by men in a hurry to be somewhere else. False front buildings leaned into each other for support. A sign hung crooked over what might have been a general store. Supplies and sundries. Half the letters had faded to ghosts. "Population can't be more than 50, Rip said. 37, Carlos said. 38 when the baby comes. They rode down what passed for Main Street. A few faces appeared in windows and doorways, hard faces that had seen too much and trusted too little. Rip recognized the look. He'd worn it himself. Carlos led him to a adobe house behind the saloon. A woman's cries came from inside, muffled but desperate. "Maria!" Carlos jumped from his horse. "I brought help!" A thin man emerged from the house, shirt soaked with sweat, hands shaking. "She's bleeding too much. I can't—" He saw Rip and stopped. "You a doctor?" "No." "Then what good are you?" Rip tied Molly to the porch rail and pulled his saddlebags free. "I've delivered foals. Sometimes that's close enough." The man, Maria's husband, Roberto, grabbed his arm. "This is my wife, not a horse." "Your wife's dying," Rip said. "You want to argue or you want help?" Roberto's grip loosened. Another cry came from inside, weaker this time. "Lead the way," Rip said. The baby's first cry cut through the morning heat like a church bell. Rip wiped blood from his hands with a torn sheet, while Maria sobbed with relief. The child, a boy, squalled in Roberto's arms, red-faced and furious at the world. "He's perfect," Roberto whispered. Tears tracked through the dust on his cheeks. "Perfect!" Carlos slapped Rip's shoulder. "You did it, senor! You saved them both!" Rip gathered his supplies and stepped onto the porch. Word had spread fast. 24 townspeople clustered in the dusty yard, watching him like he'd performed a miracle instead of just keeping his head while pulling a breech baby. An old woman crossed herself. A bearded man nodded his approval. "That's some fine work," the bearded man said. He wore a tin star on his vest, tarnished and bent. "I'm Deputy Barnes, acting sheriff since Sheriff Morrison took sick." "Rip Campbell." Barnes studied him with cop eyes, the kind that cataloged scars, noted the way a man wore his gun, remembered faces from wanted posters. "You passing through?" "Headed to Fort Worth." "Business?" "Cattle deal." A woman pushed through the crowd. She had red hair piled high and green eyes that missed nothing. Her dress was too fine for a town like Trouble, silk and lace where calico and cotton made more sense. "Martha Sue Garrett," she said. "I own the saloon. That baby you just delivered? His daddy works for my establishment." "Congratulations." She smiled, showing perfect teeth. "Buy you a drink? Town hero deserves proper thanks. Just did what needed doing." "Even so." Rip looked at the crowd, then at the ramshackle buildings lining the street. The saloon was the only structure that appeared solid, with real glass windows and painted trim. A sign swayed above the batwing doors. "The Lucky Dollar." "One drink." Martha Sue led him across the street. The crowd followed at a distance like they were watching a parade. Rip counted faces, maybe 30 people total, not the 127 the bullet-riddled town sign claimed. The Lucky Dollar's interior surprised him. Polished bar, clean glasses, decent whiskey on the shelves. A piano sat in the corner, actually in tune. Martha Sue poured 2 shots of bourbon from a bottle that didn't have a layer of dust. "To new life," she said. They drank. The whiskey was smooth, expensive stuff. "This is good bourbon for the middle of nowhere." "Trouble's not nowhere." Martha Sue refilled their glasses. "We're a railroad town. Crews change here twice a week. Supply trains take on water. Money flows through regular." "Then why's the place look like a strong wind would blow it over?" Martha Sue's smile faded. "Things change. People move on. What you see now is what's left of something bigger." Deputy Barnes pushed through the batwings. "Campbell, you planning to stay long?" "Why?" "Curious. Town like this, we notice strangers." "I'll be gone soon as my horse is sound." "What's wrong with your horse?" "Stepped in a hole, favoring her left front." Barnes nodded. "Doc Henley knows horses good as he knows people, when he's sober." "Where do I find him?" "Try his office. 2 doors down from the general store." Barnes touched his hat brim. "Obliged for what you did this morning." After Barnes left, Martha Sue poured a 3rd round without asking. "Don't mind him," she said. "He's jumpy lately. We all are." "Why?" She glanced toward the windows, then leaned closer. "Word came through last week. Some big outlaw gang work in this territory. Railroad detectives been asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that get people hurt." Martha Sue finished her drink. "You seem like a man who's been around. What do you think happens to a town when bad men start using it?" Rip studied her face. The question wasn't casual conversation. "Depends on the men," he said, "and depends on the town." Outside, a horse whinnied. Boot heels rang on the boardwalk. Several sets, moving with purpose. Martha Sue tensed. "Sounds like we're about to find out," she said. The batwing doors swung open. 6 men walked into the Lucky Dollar like they owned it, spurs jingling against floorboards that suddenly seemed too quiet. The leader wore a black hat with a silver band and a smile that promised trouble. "Martha Sue, darling, miss me?" The redhead's knuckles went white around her glass. "Black Jack." So this was Marcus Donovan. Rip had heard the name spoken in careful whispers from Abilene to El Paso. The Donovan gang had hit 3 banks and 2 trains in the past year, always disappearing into the Badlands before posses could organize. Blackjack's pale eyes swept the saloon and stopped on Rip. The smile widened, showing gold teeth that caught the lamplight. "Well, I'll be damned. Rip Campbell." Every muscle in Rip's body went tight. He kept his hands visible. Bourbon glass, steady. Donovan. "Boys, you know who this is?" Blackjack addressed his men without taking his eyes off Rip. "This here's the man who robbed the cattleman's bank in Amarillo, single-handed. Walked out with $8,000 while the sheriff was eating lunch across the street. That was 15 years ago," Rip said. "Ancient history don't make it less impressive." Blackjack stepped closer. "Heard you went straight. Pinned on a badge down in Laredo. For a while. Then turned respectable, bought yourself a little spread near San Antonio, raised cattle like a proper citizen." Martha Sue set down her glass hard enough to crack it. "Maybe you gentlemen would like to conduct your reunion somewhere else." Blackjack ignored her. "What brings Rip Campbell to our little corner of paradise?" "Just passing through." "Sure you are. Man with your reputation don't just pass through anywhere. You're here for a reason." One of Blackjack's men, a thin scarecrow with dead eyes, moved toward the bar. Another drifted left, boxing Rip against the wall. Professional moves. These weren't range trash or drifters. They knew their business. "Relax, boys." Blackjack raised his hand. "Mr. Campbell and I are old acquaintances. Almost worked together once, didn't we, Rip?" "We talked." "More than talked. You considered joining my little enterprise. What changed your mind?" Rip remembered that meeting in a Dodge City hotel room. Winter of '79, when desperation made bad ideas look reasonable. He'd needed money fast. His brother was dying, needed a doctor in Kansas City. Blackjack had offered him a partnership in something bigger than small-time bank jobs. "Decided I didn't like the company." Blackjack's laugh sounded like glass breaking. "Fair enough. Man's got to follow his conscience." He gestured to his men. "Pour yourselves drinks, boys. This is a celebration." The scarecrow moved behind the bar and grabbed a bottle. Martha Sue started to protest, then thought better of it. Smart woman. "What are we celebrating?" Rip asked. "Reunion of old friends, new opportunities, the future." Blackjack pulled out a chair and sat backwards on it, arms crossed on the backrest. "Tell me about this cattle deal in Fort Worth." "Nothing to tell." "Sure there is. Man like you, riding alone through dangerous country? Must be something important waiting?" Rip sipped his bourbon and said nothing. Let Blackjack do the talking. Outlaws loved the sound of their own voices. "Railroad's been running extra security lately," Blackjack continued. "Heard there's big money moving through this territory. Gold shipments, payrolls for the track crews. Man could make himself rich if he knew when and where. Man could get himself hanged. Not if he was smart about it. Had the right connections, inside information." Blackjack leaned forward. "Someone with your reputation opens doors, Rip. People trust you. Even lawmen respect you. Get to the point." "I need a partner, someone respectable, someone whose word carries weight when things get complicated." Martha Sue cleared her throat. "Gentlemen, I need to close up for lunch." Blackjack's smile turned cold. "No, you don't." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Rip felt the familiar tingle in his gun hand, muscle memory from years of walking the edge between life and death. "Actually," he said, standing slowly, "I should check on my horse." "Sit down, Campbell. We're not finished talking." Rip sat back down. The chair creaked under his weight, the only sound in the Lucky Dollar besides the tick of Martha Sue's mantel clock and the scrape of boot leather on floorboards as Blackjack's men found comfortable positions. "Smart choice." Blackjack signaled the scarecrow behind the bar. "Clem, pour our friend here a proper drink, the good stuff." Clem produced a bottle of Kentucky rye from under the bar, the kind that cost more than most men made in a month. He filled a fresh glass and slid it across the polished wood. The amber liquid caught the lamplight like liquid gold. "To old times?" Blackjack raised his own glass. Rip left his untouched. "Say what you came to say." "Direct." I always liked that about you. Blackjack sipped his whiskey and studied Rip's face. You know about the Texas and Pacific line running through Devil's Canyon? I know it exists. Twice a month, regular as clockwork, they run a special train through there. No passengers, just freight cars and a heavily armed guard detail. Martha Sue moved toward the kitchen door. Blackjack's voice stopped her cold. Stay put, darling. You might find this educational. She froze, one hand on the doorframe. Her knuckles showed white against the dark wood. What kind of freight? Rip asked. Gold, silver, railroad payroll money, company script for the track crews, sometimes as much as $50,000 on a single run. Heavily guarded, you said. 6 men with rifles, maybe 8. All professionals, but professionals get comfortable. Comfortable men make mistakes. Blackjack stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back like a general surveying a battlefield. His reflection stared back from the dusty glass. Devil's Canyon's perfect for what I have in mind. Narrow passage, high walls on both sides. Train has to slow down for the curves. Once we control the high ground, those guards become sitting ducks. We? Figure of speech. Blackjack turned back to face him. Point is, it's doable, with the right plan and the right people. Rip picked up his glass and held it to the light. The whiskey was clear as creek water, expensive enough to buy a good horse. What's this got to do with me? Everything? Blackjack returned to his chair, movements careful and controlled. See, there's complications. Railroads hired Pinkertons. They're sniffing around, asking questions. Some of my usual associates have become unreliable. Meaning they've developed a case of the nerves. Started talking about retirement, moving to California, finding religion. Blackjack's voice carried disgust. Weak men don't last long in this business. Clem laughed, a sound like rusty hinges. Boss took care of them complications permanent-like. Blackjack shot him a look that could freeze blood. Clem's got a big mouth, don't you, Clem? Sorry, boss. Just making conversation. Don't. Blackjack turned back to Rip. Point is, I need fresh blood. Someone the railroad don't know. Someone with the skills and reputation to make this work. Find yourself another partner. Already did. You're looking at him. Rip set down his glass untouched. I told you 15 years ago. 15 years ago you had options. Brother to take care of, legitimate business prospects. Things change. Man's situation evolves. My situation's fine. Is it? Blackjack pulled out a leather folder and spread papers across the table. Bank statements, property deeds, correspondence. Mortgage on your ranch comes due next month. Drought killed half your herd last summer. You're leveraged to the eyeballs, Campbell. This cattle deal in Fort Worth? That's desperation money. Rip's jaw tightened. Blackjack had done his homework. Even if this Fort Worth deal goes through, you'll barely break even. Pay off the bank, cover your debts, maybe have enough left to start over somewhere else. Probably Colorado, where land's cheap and dreams die hard. You seem to know a lot about my business. Information's valuable. I make it my business to know things. Blackjack tapped the papers. But what if I told you there was another way? One job clean and professional, nets you enough money to pay off every debt and buy the finest spread in Texas. Martha Sue spoke from across the room. He's lying, Mr. Campbell. Whatever he's promising, it ain't worth what he'll cost you. Blackjack's pale eyes fixed on her. Martha Sue, sweetheart, you're speaking out of turn. This is my place. I'll speak when I want. Not anymore. Blackjack nodded to 2 of his men. They moved toward her, hands resting on their gun butts. See, we've had an arrangement, you and me. I provide protection, you provide services, but arrangements change. What kind of services? Rip asked. Information mostly. Who comes through town, where they're headed, what they're carrying. Martha Sue's got a good eye for detail and a better memory for faces. The redhead's cheeks flushed. I never... Sure you did. Nothing wrong with it, darling. Business is business. Blackjack's attention returned to Rip. Point is, this town belongs to me now. Has for months. Sheriff Morrison, he works for me. Deputy Barnes, he looks the other way when my boys need supplies or fresh horses. You're saying the whole town's corrupt. I'm saying the whole town's practical. Times are hard. Money's scarce. People do what they must to survive. Rip studied the faces around him. Clem's dead eyes, the nervous tension in the other gang members, Martha Sue's barely controlled fear. Blackjack ran this place like a company town, except the company dealt in bullets and blood. So what exactly are you proposing? Simple partnership. You ride with us to Devil's Canyon, help plan the job, provide tactical expertise. When it's over, you take your cut and disappear. Go back to your cattle, pay off your debts, live happily ever after. What's my cut? 20%, $10,000, minimum, maybe more depending on what the train's carrying. $10,000. Enough to save the ranch, buy new stock, start fresh. All for one day's work that he could do in his sleep. What's the catch? Blackjack's gold teeth glinted. Who says there's a catch? There's always a catch. Well, since you insist. Blackjack gathered up the papers and returned them to the leather folder. Thing is, this job needs someone respectable to make it work. Someone the railroad trusts. Someone who can get close to the guards, maybe share a drink, swap stories about the old days. You want me as the inside man? I want you as insurance. See, if something goes wrong, and sometimes things do go wrong, the law needs someone to blame, someone whose reputation fits the crime. The pieces fell into place like cards in a poker hand. Blackjack didn't want a partner. He wanted a scapegoat. You're looking for a fall guy. I'm looking for a professional who understands how the game is played. Blackjack stood and adjusted his gun belt. Think it over, Campbell, but don't think too long. That train runs through Devil's Canyon day after tomorrow. He headed for the door, his men falling in behind him like well-trained dogs. Oh, and Campbell? Blackjack paused at the bat wings. Just so we understand each other, you're not leaving trouble until this business is finished. My boys will be keeping an eye on you, making sure you don't get any ideas about riding to Fort Worth or sending telegrams to old friends in law enforcement. The doors swung shut behind them, leaving Rip alone with Martha Sue and the tick of the mantel clock. She poured herself 3 fingers of bourbon and drank it straight down. "Congratulations," she said. "You just got conscripted." Rip walked the dusty streets of trouble as shadows stretched long across the rutted dirt. Martha Sue had disappeared into her kitchen without another word, leaving him with a bottle of expensive whiskey and the weight of impossible choices. 2 of Blackjack's men followed him at a distance, the scarecrow called Clem and a stocky Mexican with silver conchos on his hatband. They made no effort to hide their surveillance, leaning against porch posts and spitting tobacco juice while their eyes tracked his every move. He stopped at the general store. The proprietor, a nervous man with thinning hair, barely looked up from his ledger. "Need supplies." "Just looking." The man's hands shook as he turned pages. "Don't have much. Hard to keep stock with. Current conditions." Rip studied shelves that held more dust than merchandise. Canned peaches, stale crackers, a few bolts of faded cloth. The kind of inventory that marked a dying town. "How long you been here?" 8 years. Came out from Missouri after the war. Figured to make my fortune supplying the railroad crews. The man's laugh held no humor. "Guess I figured wrong." Outside, a child's voice cut through the afternoon heat. Rip looked through the grimy window and saw a boy of maybe 10 chasing a spotted dog down the street. The kid's dark hair and serious eyes reminded him of his brother Jimmy at that age. Jimmy, who died in a Kansas City hospital while Rip rode with men like Black Jack Donovan. Who'd called for his big brother with his last breath while Rip counted stolen money in a Dodge City hotel room. Winter of '78. The worst winter of Rip's life, when desperation made evil look reasonable and guilt tasted like ashes in his mouth. He'd ridden with the Kellerman gang for 3 months, long enough to rob 4 banks and kill 2 men who'd drawn on him first. long enough to earn a reputation that still followed him like a persistent shadow. "That's Billy Crenshaw," the shopkeeper said, following his gaze. "Good boy. Lost his daddy to consumption last year. His ma takes in washing to keep food on the table." The boy caught his dog and looked up, meeting Rip's eyes through the window. Something in that direct gaze, fearless curiosity mixed with old soul wisdom, hit Rip like a fist to the chest. "Boy's got sand," he said. "More than most grown men around here. Stands up to the rougher element when they get too free with their hands or their mouths around the women folk." A 10-year-old boy with more backbone than the adults who let Black Jack Donovan run their town like a feudal lord. The irony tasted bitter. Rip left the store and continued his circuit of trouble, past the empty sheriff's office with its "for rent" sign swaying in the hot wind, past the church, a simple wooden structure with a broken bell tower and weeds growing through the front steps, past houses where curtains twitched as he walked by, faces appearing and disappearing like ghosts. At the town's edge, he found the cemetery. Wooden markers leaned at drunken angles, paint faded to gray whispers. Some graves were recent. Billy Crenshaw's father, Martha Sue's father, who'd supposedly died of a fever but more likely died of lead poisoning. One marker caught his attention. James Campbell, age 12, beloved son and brother. Not his Jimmy, but close enough to make his chest tighten. How many boys had died while their big brothers made the wrong choices? How many families had paid for decisions made in desperation or greed? Clem materialized beside a scraggly mesquite tree, close enough to be insulting. "Touching scene, Campbell. You always get sentimental in graveyards?" "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how many men I've buried. How many more I might have to." Clem's hand drifted to his gun butt. "That some kind of threat?" "Statement of fact. This business you and Blackjack are planning, it's going to end with people dead. Question is who? Won't be us. Boss plans real careful. Plans go wrong. Men make mistakes. Lead starts flying and nobody controls where it lands." Clem spat into the dust. "You trying to spook me?" "Trying to educate you. You ever been in a real gunfight? Not bushwhacking some drunk cowboy or shooting a man in the back, but face-to-face with someone who knows how to use iron?" The Scarecrow's dead eyes flickered. "I can handle myself. Maybe. Or maybe you'll freeze up when the shooting starts. Piss yourself and get everyone killed because you thought carrying a gun made you dangerous. Boss says you used to be somebody. Way I see it, you're just another played-out old man talking big." Rip turned to face him full on. Something in his movement, the predatory stillness, the way his hand hung loose near his Colt, made Clem take an involuntary step backward. "Want to find out?" For 3 heartbeats, they stood frozen, the air between them crackling with potential violence. Then Clem looked away, muttering curses under his breath. "Didn't think so?" Rip said. He walked back toward town, leaving Clem standing among the graves like a scarecrow in a field of bones. The Mexican with the conchos fell in step behind him, maintaining distance but keeping watch. At the Lucky Dollar, Martha Sue was sweeping the front porch. She looked up as he approached, green eyes searching his face. "Decide what you're going to do?" "Still deciding." "Don't take too long. Blackjack's not a patient man, and patient men don't last long around him anyway." Rip looked back at the cemetery, then at Billy Crenshaw playing with his dog in the street, at the empty sheriff's office, and the nervous shopkeeper and the faces behind curtained windows. "Tell me about your father," he said. Martha Sue's broom stopped moving. "What about him?" "How he really died." Martha Sue's knuckles went white around the broom handle. She glanced toward the Mexican watching from across the street, then motioned Rip inside. The Lucky Dollar felt different in the late afternoon. Empty tables, dust motes dancing in slanted sunlight, the smell of stale whiskey and broken dreams. Martha Sue poured herself a drink with shaking hands. "Papa was shot 3 times in the back," she said. "Blackjack called it self-defense. Witnesses? Half the town. All swore Papa drew first. She laughed bitterly. Papa couldn't hit a barn door with a shotgun, much less outdraw a killer like Donovan. Rip studied her face. The pain there was real, carved deep as canyon rock. Why'd Blackjack kill him? Papa wouldn't cooperate. Wouldn't let the gang use his storeroom for their supplies. Wouldn't pass along information about travelers. Kept saying Trouble was a decent town that didn't need his kind of business. So Donovan made an example. In front of everyone. Made sure the whole town understood how things work now. Martha Sue drained her glass. Deputy Barnes ruled it justified. Sheriff Morrison backed him up. Case closed. The bat-wing doors swung open. Blackjack strolled in like he owned the place, which, Rip figured, he probably did. Two of his men flanked him, hands resting casual on their gun butts. Campbell, been taking the scenic tour? Getting acquainted with your kingdom. Impressive, isn't it? Took months to get things running smooth. Had to convince some folks that cooperation was in their best interest. Martha Sue retreated behind the bar, putting polished wood between herself and the outlaw. Smart woman. Blackjack pulled out a chair and sat backwards on it, the same position as before. Power move, designed to look casual while staying ready for action. Hope you gave serious thought to my proposition. I did. And? Rip met his pale eyes without blinking. Count me out, Jack. The temperature in the room dropped like a stone. Blackjack's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered behind his gaze. That's unfortunate, Campbell. Real unfortunate. Sorry to disappoint. See, here's the problem. Blackjack stood and walked to the bar, his spurs ringing against the floorboards. My boys have been spreading word around the territory, letting folks know that Rip Campbell's in trouble, planning something big. Rip's hand moved closer to his Colt. What kind of folks? Railroad detectives, Texas Rangers, sheriff's departments in 3 counties. Blackjack poured himself a whiskey from Martha Sue's good bottle. Amazing how fast word travels when you know the right people to tell. You son of a bitch. Now. No need for harsh language, just good business sense. See, if this train job goes sideways, somebody's got to take the blame. Can't have loose ends pointing back at me and my organization. The pieces clicked into place like a trap snapping shut. Blackjack had set him up from the moment he'd ridden into trouble. The train robbery was happening whether Rip participated or not. His refusal just meant he'd be framed posthumously instead of taking his cut alive. You planned this from the start. I planned for contingencies. Man in my position has to. Blackjack sipped his whiskey, savoring both the bourbon and the moment. Course, you could still change your mind. Join the team, take your share, disappear into Mexico with enough money to last 3 lifetimes, or you resist arrest when them railroad detectives show up tomorrow. Go down fighting like the desperate outlaw everyone thinks you are. Either way, I get what I need. Martha Sue slammed a glass down on the bar hard enough to crack it. You bastard! He saved a woman's life this morning, delivered her baby when no one else would help. Touching story. Don't change the facts. Blackjack's attention never left Rip's face. What's it gonna be, Campbell? Partner or patsy? Rip slid the untouched whiskey across the table. The glass stopped inches from Blackjack's hand, bourbon sloshing like liquid amber. Go to hell. Blackjack's smile finally died. Wrong answer. He nodded to his men. They spread out, flanking Rip from both sides. Professional killers who knew their business. The smart play was surrender. Let them take him alive. Hope for a chance to escape later. But Rip Campbell had never been accused of being smart. His hand dropped to his Colt. Martha Sue screamed. The man on his left went for iron, fast as a snake strike, but not fast enough. Rip's gun cleared leather like lightning. Thunder filled the lucky dollar as his .45 bucked in his hand. The outlaw spun backward, clutching a shattered shoulder. His partner froze with his weapon half drawn, staring down the barrel of Rip's smoking Colt. Easy, Rip said, unless you want to join him. Blackjack hadn't moved. whiskey glass still in his hand like they were discussing the weather. "Nice shooting. Always heard you were fast." "Fast enough. For now. But there's 6 more of my boys in town, Campbell. You can't shoot them all." "Want to bet?" Blackjack set down his glass and adjusted his hat. "This changes nothing. That train gets robbed tomorrow, and you take the blame. Only difference is now I know you won't go quiet." He helped his wounded man to his feet, supporting him toward the door. Blood dripped on the floorboards, dark spots that would stain the wood permanent. "Enjoy your last night of freedom, Campbell. Come morning, every lawman in Texas will be hunting you for train robbery and murder." The bat wings swung shut behind them. Martha Sue emerged from behind the bar, face pale as winter moonlight. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph! What have you done?" Rip reloaded the spent cartridge, hands steady as stone. "Drew a line in the dirt. That line's going to get you killed. Maybe, but at least I'll die standing up." Outside, horses moved in the street. Voices called orders. Blackjack was repositioning his men, tightening the noose. Rip checked his gun one more time, then looked at Martha Sue. "You know any way out of this town that don't involve the main road?" She stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You're really going to fight them all?" "Fight or run. Those are the only choices left." "There's a third choice. You could..." "Could what? Surrender? Let them frame me for robbery and murder?" Rip shook his head. "I've made enough bad choices in my life, Martha Sue. Time I made a good one." The telegraph key sat silent on the operator's desk, wires cut clean as a surgeon's blade. Rip pushed open the office door and stepped into the cramped space that smelled of oil and metal shavings. "Looking for something?" Deputy Barnes stood in the doorway behind him, shotgun cradled in his arms. The tin star on his vest caught lamplight from the street. "Thought I'd send a wire. Lines are down. Storm knocked them out yesterday." Barnes's lie came smooth as snake oil. "Repair crew won't be through for a week." Rip studied the cut ends of copper wire coiled on the floor. "Hell of a storm. Freak weather. Happens sometimes." They stared at each other across 10 feet of dusty floorboards. Barnes was older than he'd looked in daylight, maybe 50, with gray stubble and lines around his eyes that spoke of too many hard choices. His hands held the shotgun steady, but sweat beaded on his forehead. "You planning to use that scattergun, Deputy?" "Depends. You planning to give me reason?" "Not unless you give me one first." Barnes shifted his weight, boot leather creaking. "Heard there was shooting at the Lucky Dollar." "Man drew on me. I defended myself." "Blackjack says different." "Blackjack's a liar and a killer. You know it. I know it. Question is what you aim to do about it." The deputy's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "What I aim to do is keep the peace in my town." "This isn't your town anymore, Barnes. It's his." "Maybe so, but I still wear the badge." "Badge doesn't mean much if you don't have the backbone to back it up." Barnes flinched like he'd been slapped. "You don't know nothing about my situation." "I know plenty. Know you got a wife and kids to think about. Know Blackjack's got you over a barrel and you're doing what you can to survive." The shotgun barrel dropped an inch. "Then why are you pushing?" "Because sometimes a man's got to choose between surviving and living. They're not the same thing." Outside, horses moved in the street. Voices called back and forth, Blackjack's men taking positions. Barnes heard them too, his face going pale in the lamplight. "Jesus, he's got them surrounding the whole block." Rip moved to the window and peered through grimy glass. The Mexican with conchos sat his horse at the corner, Winchester across his saddle. Clem leaned against a porch post down the street, favoring his wounded shoulder but still dangerous. Others moved in the shadows between buildings. "How many men does he have?" 8, counting himself. Maybe more riding in from their camp." "Where's their camp?" Barnes hesitated, loyalty and fear warring in his weathered face. "Why?" "Because I need to know what I'm facing." You're facing nothing but a pine box if you keep this up. Surrender, Campbell. Let the law sort it out." "What law?" "You. Sheriff Morrison who takes Blackjack's money?" Rip turned from the window. "There's no law in trouble, deputy. Just men with guns deciding who lives and who dies." The sound of splintering wood echoed from across the street. Blackjack's voice carried on the night air, giving orders to check every building, every hiding place. "They're searching house to house," Barnes said. "Looking for you. Find anything interesting?" "Not yet, but they will. Town's not that big." Rip checked his Colt. 5 rounds plus the one in the chamber. He had a box of cartridges in his saddlebags, assuming Molly was still at the livery stable, and Blackjack hadn't thought to search his gear. "Stage comes through here regular?" "Every 3 days. Next one's Thursday." "What day is it now?" "Tuesday night." Barnes wiped sweat from his face. "Look, Campbell, I know what you're thinking, but there's no way out. Blackjack's got men watching every road. Even if you could reach your horse, they'd run you down before you made 5 miles. What about cross-country? Desert and badlands for 50 miles in every direction? Man on foot wouldn't last 2 days without water." A door slammed somewhere in the distance. Boots rang on boardwalks as the search continued. They were being systematic, thorough, professionals who knew their business. "There's something else," Barnes said. "Something you need to know." "What?" "Railroad detective named Morrison arrived this afternoon. Samuel Morrison. He's got 4 men with him, all carrying federal warrants." The name hit Rip like a punch to the gut. Sam Morrison, former Texas Ranger, current railroad detective, and the most honest lawman Rip had ever known. They'd worked together in Laredo, back when Rip wore a badge and believed justice meant something. "Sam's here? You know him?" "Worked with him once. Long time ago." "Well, he's got paper on you. Train robbery, conspiracy, murder. Blackjack fed him a story about you planning to hit the Devil's Canyon run. Showed him evidence, schedules, inside information, all of it pointing your direction. Planted evidence. Maybe so. But it looks real enough to convince a jury. Morrison's got orders to bring you in dead or alive." Rip sank into the telegraph operator's chair, the weight of impossible odds pressing down like a lead blanket. Blackjack had planned this trap with surgical precision, every escape route blocked, every ally turned against him, every legal authority convinced of his guilt. "How long before Morrison moves?" "Dawn. He's waiting for first light to avoid civilian casualties." "Decent of him. Sam Morrison's a good man, always was. Good men get used by bad ones all the time." Rip stood and moved back to the window. "Especially when the bad ones are smart enough to make lies look like truth." A figure moved in the alley beside the general store. Another of Blackjack's men, rifle in hand, cutting off that avenue of escape. The net was tightening with each passing minute. "There's got to be something," Rip muttered. "Some way out of this box." Barnes holstered his shotgun and pulled out a tobacco pouch, hands shaking as he rolled a cigarette. "Maybe there is." "What?" "Maybe there's someone in this town who's tired of living under Blackjack's thumb. Someone who might be willing to help, if they knew help was coming." Rip turned from the window. "You talking about yourself, deputy? I'm talking about doing what's right. For once in my goddamn life." The match flame illuminated Barnes's face as he lit his cigarette, showing determination where fear had been moments before. "What did you have in mind?" Barnes stubbed out his cigarette and moved to the back window. "There's a storm cellar behind Doc Henley's place. Old root cellar from before the town got built up. Blackjack's boys don't know about it." "Doc's the drunk you mentioned." "Was a drunk. Been sober 3 days now, ever since Blackjack's men roughed up Billy Crenshaw for asking too many questions." Rip remembered the boy with the spotted dog, the serious eyes that reminded him of his dead brother. "What kind of questions?" "About his daddy's death. About other folks who died sudden-like after crossing Blackjack." Barnes checked his pocket watch. "Doc delivered that boy, watched him grow up. Seeing him get knocked around for speaking truth lit a fire under the old man. He reliable. Sober. He's the best doctor between here and El Paso. Drunk. He's worthless as tits on a bull. Barnes moved toward the door. But like I said, he's been sober. They slipped out the back of the telegraph office into an alley that reeked of garbage and broken dreams. Moonlight cast everything in silver and shadow, making every doorway a potential hiding place for armed men. Barnes led him through a maze of backyards and outbuildings, staying clear of the main streets where Blackjack's search parties moved with lanterns and harsh voices. A dog barked somewhere, then fell silent with a yelp that suggested boot leather applied to ribs. Doc Henley's place sat at the end of a narrow street, a ramshackle two-story building with a faded sign. Medical practice, all hours. Paint peeled from the siding like diseased skin, and weeds choked the front steps. Barnes rapped twice, paused, then rapped 3 times more. A window opened on the second floor. "Who's there?" "It's Barnes. I've got him with me." The window closed. Footsteps creaked on stairs, then locks turned and chains rattled. The door opened to reveal a man in his 60s, thin as a fence post but standing straight. His eyes were clear, the clearest eyes Rip had seen in town. "Mr. Campbell, heard you delivered Maria's baby this morning. News travels fast." "Good news does. Bad news travels faster." Doc Henley stepped aside to let them enter. "Heard about the shooting at Martha Sue's, too." The interior of the house smelled like carbolic acid and old books. Medical texts lined shelves that reached the ceiling. An examination table dominated the front room, clean instruments laid out on a spotless cloth. "You really been sober 3 days?" Rip asked. 3 days, 14 hours, 22 minutes. Doc's voice carried no shame, just fact. "Not proud of the years before that, but I'm done drowning my sorrows in rot-gut whiskey." "What changed?" Doc moved to his medical bag and checked the contents. Scalpels, forceps, bottles of medicine. "Watch Billy Crenshaw take a beating for asking why his daddy really died. Boy's got more courage than any of us adults. Figured it was time I found some backbone of my own." Barnes moved to the window and peered through the curtains. "They're still searching. Methodical bastards." "How long before they get here?" Rip asked. "Hour, maybe 2. They're checking every building, but they started on the far side of town." Doc Henley opened a cabinet and pulled out a Winchester rifle, checking the action with practiced ease. "I can hold them off if needed. Used to hunt buffalo before I took up medicine. Still remember which end the bullet comes out of." "This isn't your fight, Doc." "Hell it isn't. I've watched this town die piece by piece under Blackjack's boot. Time someone fought back." A soft knock came at the back door. 2 quick raps, then 3 more. Doc nodded to Barnes, who drew his gun and moved to answer it. Martha Sue slipped inside, her red hair hidden under a dark shawl. She carried a cloth bundle that clinked like metal on metal. "Brought what you asked for," she said to Barnes. "Box of shells, some jerky, and a water bottle." "What else?" Doc asked. "Billy Crenshaw's outside, says he wants to help." "Absolutely not." Rip stepped toward the door. "This is no place for a kid." "That kid knows every hiding place in town, every bolt hole, every tunnel, every way in and out that grown men forget about." Martha Sue's green eyes flashed. "Plus, he can move around without drawing attention. Blackjack's men see a boy playing with his dog, they don't think twice." The back door opened again, and Billy Crenshaw stepped inside, the spotted dog at his heels. The boy looked older than his 10 years, like worry had aged him beyond his time. "Mr. Campbell, sir. Heard you were in trouble." "That's right. Bad trouble. The kind that gets people killed. My daddy died standing up to bad men. Mama says that makes him a hero." Billy's voice was steady, adult. "I want to be a hero, too. Heroes end up in graveyards, son. Cowards end up there, too, just with less honor." Doc Henley laughed, the first genuine sound Rip had heard since riding into trouble. Boy's got a point. Cowardice doesn't guarantee safety, just shame. Martha Sue moved to the window and looked out at the darkened street. Blackjack's got men watching the livery stable, the roads out of town, even the old mine shaft up on the ridge. But there's places a boy and a dog can go that grown men can't follow. Such as? Storm drains under the main street. Crawl space under the church. Old Indian caves in the rocks north of town. Billy counted on his fingers. Lots of places if you know where to look. Barnes holstered his gun and looked at each of them in turn. So what's the plan? Hide Campbell until Morrison and his men move on? Morrison won't move on, Rip said. He's got federal paper and a reputation for finishing what he starts. Only way this ends is if we prove Blackjack set me up. How do we do that? Doc Henley set his rifle against the wall and pulled out a bottle of laudanum. Same way we solve any problem. Cut out the infection before it spreads. Meaning? Meaning we turn the tables. Make Blackjack the hunted instead of the hunter. Martha Sue turned from the window. They're coming this way. 2 men with lanterns, maybe 3 blocks out. Time to move, Barnes said. Billy whistled low and the spotted dog's ears perked up. Follow me, Mr. Campbell. I know a place they'll never think to look. Rip checked his gun one more time, then looked at the faces around him. A corrupt deputy finding his conscience, a drunk doctor reclaiming his sobriety, a saloon owner seeking justice for her murdered father, and a 10-year-old boy with more courage than sense. Why are you all willing to risk this? Because, Doc Henley said, picking up his medical bag and rifle. Sometimes a man's got to choose between surviving and living. They're not the same thing. Rip's own words thrown back at him. He smiled despite the circumstances. Lead the way, Billy. Let's see if we can't even the odds. Billy Crenshaw led them through a maze of storm drains that ran beneath trouble like arteries under diseased skin. The spotted dog trotted ahead, nose to the ground, ears alert for danger above. Water seeped through limestone walls, making everything slick and treacherous in the lantern light. How'd you find these tunnels? Rip whispered. Daddy showed me. Said every town's got secrets underneath, just like people do. They emerged behind the church through a grate hidden by overgrown mesquite. Billy poked his head up first, scanning for Blackjack's men, then motioned the others to follow. Clear, he whispered. The church sat empty and dark, its broken bell tower silhouetted against star-filled sky. Through the cracked windows, Rip could see lanterns moving in the street, Blackjack's search parties working their way systematically through the town. How long before they figure out we're not hiding in the buildings? Martha Sue asked. Dawn, Barnes said. That's when Morrison makes his move anyway. Blackjack will want you found before then. Doc Henley set his medical bag on a pew and checked his rifle again. What's Morrison like? As a man, I mean. Honest, thorough. Doesn't give up once he's on a trail. Rip moved to the altar and looked out through a hole in the stained glass window. He'll have studied every wanted poster, every report. If Blackjack's evidence looks real, Sam will believe it. Then we make sure he sees the truth. How? Martha Sue pulled a leather satchel from under her shawl. I've been keeping records, dates, times, names of people who died or disappeared after crossing Blackjack, money that went missing from the town treasury, supplies that vanished from the general store. She spread papers across the altar like a lawyer preparing a case. In the dim light, Rip could make out columns of figures, lists of names, detailed notes written in careful script. This is evidence, he said. 3 months' worth, ever since Blackjack killed Papa and took over the town. Barnes leaned over her shoulder, reading. Jesus, Martha Sue, if Blackjack knew you had this, he'd kill me slower than he killed Papa. Billy whistled from the window. Riders coming. 4 men, heading for the church. Back to the tunnels, Doc said. Wait. Rip studied the papers. One name caught his attention. Connor O'Malley, listed as a railroad supervisor who'd been asking questions about missing supply shipments. I know this man. O'Malley, We served together in the war." "He's dead," Martha Sue said. "Found shot in the back 2 weeks ago. Blackjack claimed it was Mexican bandits." Connor was no fool. If he was investigating supply thefts, he would have sent reports to his superiors, filed paperwork. "What good does that do us now?" The sound of horses grew closer. Spurs jingled on the church steps. "Back to the drains," Billy urged. But Rip was thinking, pieces falling into place. "Doc, you said you wanted to cut out the infection. What if we could prove Blackjack killed a railroad employee? Federal crime. Morrison would have to investigate." "With what proof?" "O'Malley's reports, his investigation files. Railroad keeps records of everything." Voices echoed outside the church. "Check inside. They might be hiding in the bell tower." This time they moved fast, slipping back through the narrow openings into the drains. Billy led them deeper underground, through tunnels that angled away from the church toward the railroad depot. "Where are we going?" Martha Sue whispered. "Depot's got a telegraph office," Billy said. "Separate line from the town office. Railroad maintains their own communications." They emerged from a culvert behind the water tower. The depot sat dark and silent, a single lamp burning in the station master's window. A night freight waited on the siding, taking on water and coal for the run to El Paso. "Station master's name is Grizz," Barnes said. "Polish fellow. Keeps to himself. Doesn't get involved in town politics." "Think he'd help us?" "If it means catching the man who killed his friend O'Malley, maybe." They circled the depot, staying in the shadows cast by freight cars and coal bins. Through the office window, they could see a middle-aged man with thick spectacles bent over paperwork, a telegraph key at his elbow. Rip tapped on the window. Grizz looked up, squinting into the darkness. Recognition dawned and fear followed close behind. "You're Campbell, the one they're hunting." "I need to send a wire. Telegraph's monitored. Blackjack's got men watching." "Not the town line, the railroad line." Grizz glanced toward the night freight, then back at Rip. "What kind of wire?" "To railroad headquarters in Fort Worth, about Connor O'Malley's investigation." The station master's expression changed. Behind the thick glasses, something hardened. "Connor was a good man. Didn't deserve what happened to him." "Help me prove who killed him." Grizz looked at each of them. The corrupt deputy, the reformed drunk, the saloon owner, the boy with his dog. "This is crazy. They'll kill us all." "They'll kill us anyway," Doc said. "Question is whether we die like sheep or wolves." A train whistle echoed in the distance, another freight approaching from the east. Grizz checked his pocket watch. "That'll be the morning eastbound, due in Fort Worth by noon." He moved to his telegraph key. "What do you want to say?" Rip thought fast. "Send it to Samuel Morrison, railroad detective, care of Texas and Pacific headquarters. Tell him Connor O'Malley was investigating supply thefts in Trouble, Texas. Tell him O'Malley's files are hidden in the depot safe, combination written in his personal effects." "O'Malley didn't leave any files here." "He will by morning." Martha Sue understood first. She pulled out her leather satchel. "We create the files. Use Connor's investigation as cover for everything we've documented about Blackjack." "Forge evidence?" "Present evidence. All we're doing is organizing what Connor would have found if he'd lived long enough." Grizz's fingers hovered over the telegraph key. Outside, the night freight's whistle grew louder. Soon the train would pull out, carrying news of their message toward Fort Worth and Morrison's superiors. "Once I send this, there's no taking it back," Grizz said. "Good," Rip replied. "Time Blackjack learned what it feels like to be hunted." The telegraph key began to chatter, tapping out their message into the darkness. Dot dash, spelling out Blackjack Donovan's doom, one letter at a time. Billy pressed his face to the window, watching for Blackjack's men. "Riders coming from town. Moving fast." "How long to finish the message?" Doc asked. 2 minutes, Grizz said, fingers flying over the key. Martha Sue spread her papers on the desk. sorting them into categories. We need to make this look like Connor's work, his handwriting, his investigation methods. I have samples of his reports, Grizz said, without stopping his telegraph work, in the filing cabinet. The sound of approaching horses grew louder. Spurs rang on the depot platform. Time's up, Barnes said. The telegraph finished with a final click. Grizz grabbed Connor's files and Martha Sue's evidence, shoving everything into an envelope. Safe combinations written inside Connor's watch, he said. 27, 15, 43. Birth date of his daughter back in Chicago. Boot heels rang on the platform. A voice called out, "Grizz, open up!" "Back door," Billy whispered. But Rip was already moving toward the front entrance, hand on his gun. "No more running. Time to make a stand." Samuel Morrison stepped through the depot doorway like judgment itself, tall, weathered, with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. Two railroad detectives flanked him, rifles ready. Behind them stood Deputy Barnes, badge glinting in the lamplight. "Rip Campbell, been a long time." "Hello, Sam." Morrison's gaze swept the room, cataloging faces and positions. "Doc Henley, Martha Sue, station master." His attention settled on Billy Crenshaw. "Boy, you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," Billy said. "Not if you're here to arrest an innocent man. That's for a judge to decide." Morrison's voice carried no malice, just weary professionalism. "Rip, I've got federal warrants. Train robbery, conspiracy, murder. You want to come quiet, or do we do this the hard way?" Rip kept his hands visible, away from his gun. "Depends. You willing to look at evidence that says I'm being framed?" "What evidence?" Martha Sue stepped forward, the envelope of documents in her hand. "Connor O'Malley was investigating Black Jack Donovan before he died. These are his files." Morrison's expression sharpened. "O'Malley's dead, killed by bandits 2 weeks ago. Killed by Donovan's men because he got too close to the truth." "You have proof?" "In the safe. Connor hid his investigation there before they murdered him." Morrison studied her face, cop instincts weighing truth against deception. "Station master, open your safe." Grizz moved to the iron strongbox mounted in the wall. His hands shook as he worked the combination, 27, 15, 43. The tumblers clicked home, and the door swung open. Inside lay Connor O'Malley's watch, his investigation files, and Martha Sue's carefully documented evidence of Blackjack's crimes. Morrison pulled out the papers and began reading by lamplight. Supply thefts, missing payroll money, unexplained deaths. His gray eyes lifted to meet Rip's. "This doesn't clear you of the train robbery charges." "Because the train hasn't been robbed yet," Rip said. "Blackjack's planning to hit the Devil's Canyon run tomorrow, with or without me." "Then why frame you?" "Insurance. If something goes wrong, he needs a scapegoat. My reputation makes it believable." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers. Outside, horses moved in the street, Blackjack's men still searching. "Even if this is true, I've got federal paper. Can't just ignore—" The depot windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and gunfire. Morrison dove left, his detectives right. Bullets chewed wood from the walls as Blackjack's voice roared from the darkness. "Morrison! Send out Campbell and nobody else gets hurt!" The railroad detective crawled to the window, careful to stay below the sill. "Donovan! This is federal business!" "This is my town, Morrison! My rules!" More gunfire erupted from multiple positions. Blackjack had surrounded the depot with riflemen, turning it into a death trap. Splinters flew as bullets punched through the thin walls. "So much for doing this legal," Doc Henley muttered, checking his rifle. Billy and his dog had taken cover behind the ticket counter. "Mr. Campbell, there's another way out." "Where?" "Freight tunnel under the platform, connects to the coal bins." Morrison reloaded his rifle and looked at Rip. "This changes things. Donovan just fired on federal officers." "Now you believe me?" Now I believe somebody's desperate enough to start a war. Morrison's steely gaze swept the room. How many men does he have out there? 8, maybe 10, Barnes said. All of them killers. A bullet shattered the station master's lamp, plunging them into near darkness. Only moonlight through the broken windows provided illumination. We can't hold this position, one of Morrison's detectives said. Too many shooters, not enough cover. The tunnel, Billy urged. It's our only chance. Doc Henley moved to his medical bag and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Might be able to provide some distraction. What's that? Morrison asked. Dynamite. From the old mining operation up the ridge. Sometimes use it for removing tree stumps. Jesus, Doc, Barnes said. You planning to blow up the depot? Just the coal bin. Create some smoke and confusion while we escape through the tunnel. Morrison looked at the bundle like it might bite him. That legal? Nothing about this situation is legal anymore, Rip said. Question is whether you want to arrest me or catch the real criminals. Another volley of gunfire swept the depot. A bullet creased Martha Sue's arm, drawing blood. Doc immediately moved to bandage the wound. Flesh wound, he said. You'll live. Not if we stay here much longer, she replied. Morrison made his decision. Show me this tunnel. Billy led them to a trap door hidden beneath a loose floorboard behind the freight counter. The opening revealed a narrow passage that smelled of coal dust and dampness. Where does it come out? Morrison asked. Coal bins behind the water tower. From there we can reach the old mine road. And then? Then we hunt Blackjack before he robs that train and disappears into Mexico. Doc Henley finished preparing his explosive charge. Give me 2 minutes to position this, then everybody into the tunnel. He slipped out the back door into the night. Seconds later, Blackjack's voice echoed again. Last chance, Morrison. Send out Campbell. Go to hell, Donovan. Wrong answer. The gunfire intensified. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireflies. Wood splintered and glass shattered as the depot took a systematic beating. There! Billy pointed toward the coal bins. Doc's signal! A small flame flickered near the coal pile. Doc's match, ready to light the fuse. Into the tunnel, Morrison ordered. Now! They dropped through the trapdoor one by one, Martha Sue first, then Billy and his dog, then Barnes and the detectives. Rip went last, pulling the trapdoor shut just as Doc's dynamite exploded. The blast shook the earth like thunder. Coal and debris rained down as smoke billowed into the night sky. Shouts and confusion erupted from Blackjack's men as they tried to figure out what had happened. In the tunnel, they crawled through darkness toward uncertain freedom. Behind them, the depot burned. Ahead lay the Devil's Canyon train run and a showdown that would determine who lived and who died in the town called Trouble. Welcome to my war, Sam, Rip said as they reached the coal bins. Morrison wiped soot from his face and checked his rifle. Let's finish it. The coal dust cloud provided cover for maybe 10 minutes. Rip counted 7 horses heading east toward the Badlands as Blackjack's men scattered like quail from the explosion. The 8th horse, a black stallion he recognized as Donovan's mount, headed north toward the Devil's Canyon Road. He's making for the train, Morrison said, spitting coal grit from his mouth. Or his camp in the rocks. Doc Henley shouldered his rifle and medical bag. Either way, we're losing ground. They'd retrieved their horses from the livery stable during the chaos, the stable boy too terrified to ask questions. Now 8 riders moved through moonlit Badlands, tracking 7 killers across country that could hide an army. Billy Crenshaw rode double behind Barnes, the spotted dog loping alongside. The kid had insisted on coming despite Morrison's protests. Boy knows the territory better than any of us, Rip had argued. Plus, someone needs to watch our backs. Martha Sue pulled up alongside him, her wounded arm bound, but still functional. How well do you know this Morrison fellow? Well enough. He's honest, thorough, and doesn't quit. If Sam says he'll see this through, he will. even if it means facing down 8 professional killers, especially then. The trail led through red rock country cut by arroyos and mesquite thickets. Blackjack's men had split into 3 groups, making tracking harder, but they'd left enough sign for someone who knew how to read it. "Fresh droppings here," one of Morrison's detectives called. "Maybe 2 hours old." 3 horses, Rip said, studying the hoof prints. "Heading for that ridge line." Doc Henley checked his pocket watch. "Train's due through Devil's Canyon at 2 o'clock. That's 6 hours from now." "Plenty of time for Blackjack to set his ambush," Morrison said. "Question is where?" Billy spoke up from behind Barnes. "There's 3 places in the canyon where you could stop a train. Devil's Bend, where the track curves around that big rock. Widow's Pass, where the walls close in tight. And the bridge over Serpent Creek." "Which would you choose?" Morrison asked. The boy thought for a moment. "Devil's Bend. High ground on both sides, good escape routes. And the train has to slow down for the curve." "Smart kid." "His daddy raised him right," Martha Sue said quietly. They climbed steadily into the rocks, following a trail that wound between boulders the size of houses. The horses picked their way carefully over loose stone that could turn an ankle or start a rock slide. "Ambush country," Morrison muttered. As if summoned by his words, a rifle cracked from the ridge above them. The bullet whined off stone inches from Doc Henley's head. "Take cover!" Rip shouted. They scattered behind rocks as more gunfire erupted from multiple positions. Blackjack's men had set their own ambush, turning hunters into hunted with deadly efficiency. "Can't see them," Barnes called. "Too many shadows." Another bullet sparked off the boulder protecting Martha Sue. She pressed herself flat, green eyes wide with fear. Billy whistled low, and his dog bounded up the slope through gaps too narrow for horses. Seconds later, a man's cry echoed from above, followed by snarling and cursing. "Good dog," Billy grinned. Morrison crawled to Rip's position. "We can't stay pinned down here. That train—" "I know." Rip studied the terrain above them. 3 muzzle flashes, maybe 4. Blackjack had left some men to slow pursuit while he prepared the real ambush. "Doc, still got any of that dynamite?" "1 stick. Was saving it for special occasions." "This qualifies." The gunfire slackened as the outlaws repositioned. In the brief lull, Rip could hear Billy's dog still raising hell somewhere up the slope. "There's a ledge about 50 yards up," he told Morrison. "If we can get above them—" "I'll go," Doc said. "I know these rocks better than any of you." "Doc? This is my chance to do something right. Been waiting 60 years for it." Before anyone could stop him, Doc Henley was climbing, medical bag on his back and dynamite in his hand. He moved like a man half his age, finding handholds in stone that looked smooth as glass. The outlaws spotted him too late. Doc's dynamite arced through the moonlight like a falling star, landing among the rocks where muzzle flashes had betrayed their positions. The explosion shattered the night. Stone fragments whistled through air thick with dust and smoke. When the echoes died, only silence remained from the ridge above. "Let's move," Rip said, "before Blackjack gets too far ahead." They mounted up and continued toward Devil's Canyon, leaving the dead behind them in the rocks. Dawn crept over Devil's Canyon like spilled blood, painting the red rock walls the color of old rust. Rip lay flat on a limestone outcrop, studying the terrain below through Morrison's field glasses. Blackjack had chosen his ground well. Devil's Bend curved like a horseshoe around a massive boulder formation, forcing the train to slow for the turn. High ridges on both sides provided perfect shooting positions, while multiple escape routes led into the Badlands beyond. "Count 4 men on the north wall," Rip whispered. 2 more south. Blackjack's probably positioned himself where he can see everything." Morrison crawled up beside him. "That's only 7. What about the 8th man? Could be watching our back trail. Could be dead from last night's ambush." Rip lowered the glasses. "Or could be something else entirely." Below them, The abandoned mine where they'd taken shelter revealed more secrets in daylight. Martha Sue had found surveyor's maps in the office, showing not just the mine tunnels but the entire canyon system. "Look at this," she called softly from inside the shack. They gathered around her as she spread the yellowed papers across a broken table. The maps showed Devil's Canyon in precise detail, every ridge, every gulch, every way in and out. "According to this, there's a second rail line," she said, tracing a dotted line with her finger. "Runs parallel to the main track about half a mile south, abandoned spur from the old mining operation." Doc Henley studied the map. Why would Black Jack care about a dead rail line? Billy Crenshaw looked up from where he was sharing jerky with his dog. Maybe it's not dead. Maybe that's how he's planning to get the gold out. Morrison frowned. "Explain." "Pa used to work railroad construction. Said the hardest part of any job wasn't building track, it was moving supplies and equipment to remote locations." Billy's young voice carried adult understanding. "You steal gold from a train in the middle of nowhere, how do you transport it? Horses can't carry that much weight. Wagons leave tracks. But a locomotive—" "Jesus," Morrison breathed. "He's got his own train." The pieces fell together like a puzzle solving itself. Blackjack's plan wasn't just robbery, it was replacement. Stop the gold train, transfer the cargo to his own locomotive, then disappear into Mexico along abandoned rail lines that didn't appear on current maps. "That's why he needed me," Rip said. "Not as muscle for the robbery, but as a scapegoat for when they found the empty train. Dead outlaw, case closed, while the real thieves vanished south of the border." Martha Sue traced the abandoned spur line to its terminus. "According to this, the old line connects to the Mexican National Railway near Presidio. Blackjack could disappear into Mexico with enough gold to buy his own army." Barnes spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Clever bastard." "Too clever," Morrison said grimly. "This changes everything. We're not just stopping a train robbery, we're preventing an international incident. That much gold in the wrong hands could finance revolution, banditry, or worse." Doc Henley checked his rifle action. "So what's the plan?" Morrison studied the map, calculating distances and timing. "Train's due at Devil's Bend in 4 hours. If Black Jack's running his own locomotive, it has to be staged somewhere close. The old mine head, probably." "Half-mile through those rocks," Rip said. "Rough country for horses." We split up. Half of us stop Blackjack's robbery, half secure his escape train. "And if his 8th man is guarding the locomotive?" "Then we hope Doc's got more dynamite." The old doctor patted his medical bag. "Always prepared for surgery. Sometimes you got to cut deep to save the patient." Billy looked up from the map. "There's something else. See this marking here?" He pointed to a symbol near the rail junction. "That's a water tower. Locomotives need water every 50 miles or so. If Blackjack's planning to run all the way to Mexico, he'd need to stop there." Morrison's steel-gray eyes lit up. "Perfect place for an ambush. He stops for water, we stop him permanent." "Assuming we can get there in time," Martha Sue said. "We'll make time." Rip stood and checked his Colt. "Question is, who goes where?" Morrison made the assignments like a general deploying troops. "Barnes, you and one of my men take the water tower. Set up to hit Black Jack when he stops for supplies. Doc, Martha Sue, and my other detective will secure the mine head and that locomotive. Campbell, you and the boy come with me to Devil's Bend." "Billy shouldn't—" Martha Sue started. "Billy knows this country and he's earned his place," Rip said. "Besides, someone needs to watch the horses while we're shooting." The boy grinned, looking older than his 10 years. "Don't worry, Miss Martha Sue. I'll stay with the dog and keep my head down." Morrison folded the map and distributed ammunition from their supply. "Remember, that train's carrying federal gold and civilian guards. We can't just start shooting. Gotta be surgical about this." "Tell that to Black Jack," Doc said. "I intend to." They split up as the sun climbed higher, each group taking different routes through the canyon system. Rip watched Martha Sue disappear into the rocks with Doc Henley, hoping he'd see her alive again. "You sweet on her?" Billy asked, leading his dog toward their position overlooking Devil's Bend. "What makes you say that?" "Way you look at her. Same way my pa used to look at my ma before she died." Rip didn't answer. In the distance, a train whistle echoed off canyon walls, mournful as a funeral dirge, promising as a church bell. The gold train was coming, and with it, the reckoning that would decide who controlled this corner of Texas. "Time to finish what we started," he told Morrison. The railroad detective checked his pocket watch. 2 hours to showtime. Let's make them count. Martha Sue crept through the abandoned mine tunnel, Doc Henley's breathing harsh behind her in the darkness. Their single lantern cast dancing shadows on timber supports that groaned with age and neglect. "Should have stayed back with the horses," Doc muttered. "Should have minded your own business," she replied. "But neither of us is smart enough for that." The tunnel opened into a natural cavern where railroad tracks gleamed in the lantern light. A locomotive sat silent on the rails, a smaller engine than the main line used, but powerful enough to pull several freight cars across 200 miles of desert. "Well, I'll be damned," Doc said. "Boy was right." Martha Sue approached the engine, noting the Mexican national markings painted over Texas and Pacific logos. Steam still rose from the boiler, recent ashes in the firebox. This locomotive was ready to run. "Fresh coal in the tender," Morrison's detective observed from the shadows. "Somebody's been keeping her maintained." "Where's the crew?" Doc asked. "Good question." A voice answered from the darkness behind them. "Right here, Doc." They spun toward the sound. Clem stepped into the lantern light, Scarecrow thin but very much alive. His left shoulder was bandaged where Rip's bullet had found him, but his gun hand worked fine. "Thought you were dead," Martha Sue said. "Takes more than falling rocks to kill me, lady. Though it was close." Clem's dead eyes never blinked. "Boss figured somebody might try to find our little railroad. Told me to wait here, make sure nobody interfered with the schedule." "What schedule?" "Train gets robbed at Devil's Bend. Gold gets transferred to this locomotive. We disappear into Mexico richer than kings." Clem's smile revealed rotted teeth. "Simple plan. Elegant, you might say." Doc Henley shifted slightly, angling for a clear shot. "What about the guards on the train? The innocent people? What about them? They chose to ride with railroad gold. They take their chances." "You're talking about murder." "I'm talking about business." Clem raised his rifle. "Now drop your weapons. Nice and easy." Doc hesitated, calculating odds. Martha Sue saw the decision forming in his weathered face, the same look her father had worn before Black Jack shot him down. "Don't," she whispered. But Doc was already moving, throwing himself sideways as his rifle came up. Clem's shot echoed through the cavern like thunder, muzzle flash illuminating Doc's falling body. Martha Sue screamed. Morrison's detective dove for cover behind the locomotive's driving wheels, firing rapidly at where Clem had been standing. But the Scarecrow man was gone, vanished into the tunnel darkness like smoke. "Doc!" Martha Sue crawled to where the old man lay sprawled against the railroad ties. Blood soaked his shirt, dark and spreading. "How bad?" he whispered. She pressed her hands against the wound, feeling warm blood between her fingers. "Bad. Real bad. Medical bag, laudanum." Doc's voice was fading. "For the pain. Save your strength." "For what? Dying?" Doc laughed, which turned into a cough that brought up blood. "Listen to me, girl. Locomotive's ready to run. All you got to do is release the brake and open the throttle." "I don't know how—" "Brake wheel's on the tender. Big wheel, turn it left to release. Throttle's in the cab. Looks like a valve handle. Turn it right to go forward." The detective appeared beside them. "He's gone. Slipped back into the tunnels." "Can you track him? In the dark with all these side passages?" The man shook his head. "He knows this place better than we do." Doc gripped Martha Sue's wrist with surprising strength. Doesn't matter. What matters is stopping that locomotive from leaving. How? Dynamite. Still got one stick in my bag. His breathing was shallow, labored. Set it on the tracks about 50 yards out. When Blackjack tries to run, boom. End of story. Martha Sue found the dynamite and a length of fuse. Her hands shook as she examined the unfamiliar device. I've never... Simple as lighting a candle. Stick the fuse in the powder, light the end, run like hell. How long do I have? Minute, maybe 2. Depends on how much fuse you use. The detective checked his pocket watch. Train should be hitting Devil's Bend right about now. If Campbell and Morrison stop the robbery, Blackjack will head straight here, Martha Sue finished. With or without the gold? Doc struggled to sit up against the locomotive's cowcatcher. Blood stained his lips, but his eyes were clear. Then you better get moving. Take that dynamite and make it count. What about you? I'll hold Clem off if he comes back. Buy you time to set the charge. Doc, go! His voice carried the authority of a man who'd delivered babies and closed eyes for 60 years. This is my fight now. Has been since that bastard took over my town. Martha Sue kissed his forehead, tasting salt and copper. Then she grabbed the dynamite and ran toward the tunnel mouth, leaving Doc Henley alone with his rifle and his memories. Behind her, his voice echoed through the cavern. Martha Sue, make your daddy proud. She ran into darkness, carrying death in her hands and hope in her heart. Outside, gunfire cracked like breaking bones. The train whistle's mournful wail echoed off canyon walls as the Texas and Pacific locomotive rounded the bend, black smoke trailing like a funeral shroud. Rip counted 6 guards visible on the freight cars, professional men with Winchester rifles and steady eyes. Right on schedule, Morrison whispered from their position in the rocks above Devil's Bend. Billy lay flat beside them, his spotted dog panting quietly in the morning heat. The boy's face was pale but determined, clutching a spare rifle they'd given him, just in case. There, Billy pointed. North Ridge, second boulder from the left. Rip followed the boy's gaze and spotted the glint of metal, rifle barrel catching sunlight. Then another and another. Blackjack's men were positioned like pieces on a chessboard, covering every angle of attack. The train began to slow for the curve, steel wheels squealing against rails worn smooth by countless passages. Steam hissed from the locomotive as the engineer reduced pressure, following standard procedure for the dangerous turn. That's when Black Jack Donovan stepped into view on the South Ridge, arms raised like a preacher calling for salvation. His voice boomed across the canyon. "Stop the train! By order of the Donovan gang!" The engineer's response was a blast of the steam whistle, defiant as a war cry. Instead of stopping, the locomotive surged forward, picking up speed despite the dangerous curve. "Brave man," Morrison said. "Dead man," Rip corrected. Blackjack's rifle cracked. The engineer jerked backward, clutching his shoulder. The locomotive began to slow again as he slumped over the controls. "Now!" Blackjack shouted. Gunfire erupted from 6 positions simultaneously. The railroad guards returned fire, muzzle flashes sparking from behind freight car walls. Bullets whined off rock and steel as the battle joined in earnest. "We can't just watch," Billy said. "Those guards are getting slaughtered." He was right. Blackjack's men had superior position and numbers. The guards fought well, but they were trapped on an exposed train with limited cover. "Morrison, you and Billy circle left," Rip said. "Get behind that outcrop and pick off the shooters on the North Ridge." "What about you?" "I'm going down there." Rip checked his Colt and started scrambling down the rocky slope toward the train. Someone needs to even the odds. He reached the rail bed as a guard toppled from the freight car, clutching a bloody chest. The remaining defenders were running low on ammunition, their return fire growing sporadic. Rip sprinted along the tracks, using the locomotive for cover. Steam still hissed from ruptured pipes where bullets had found their mark. The wounded engineer looked up as Rip climbed into the cab. "Thank God. Thought you were another bandit." Can you move this train? Maybe. If the boiler don't explode first. The man's face was gray with pain and loss of blood. Who are you? Someone who doesn't like train robbers. A bullet shattered the cab window, spraying glass across the controls. Rip returned fire, his shot sparking off rocks where a muzzle flash had betrayed a shooter's position. "Get us moving!" he shouted over the gunfire. The engineer reached for the throttle with his good arm. Steam pressure built with a sound like an angry dragon. The locomotive lurched forward, wheels spinning on the rails before finding purchase. Blackjack's voice roared above the battle. "Stop that train! Kill anyone who tries to move it!" More gunfire converged on the locomotive. The firebox door clanged open as bullets punched through the cab walls. Rip dove flat as lead whistled overhead. From the rocks above, Morrison's rifle answered with measured shots. One of Blackjack's men tumbled from his perch, rifle clattering down the slope. Then another fell as Billy proved his marksmanship wasn't just talk. "Kid's got sand," the engineer grunted, working the controls despite his wound. The train picked up speed, pulling away from the ambush point. But Blackjack wasn't finished. The outlaw leader appeared on the tracks ahead, both guns drawn, blocking the locomotive's path like a man challenging a charging bull. "Stop, or I'll kill everyone on this train!" Rip aimed his Colt through the shattered cab window, 200 yards and closing fast. Blackjack's pale eyes were visible now, filled with desperate fury. "He's not moving," the engineer said. "Then we run him down. He'll jump at the last second, then put bullets through our skulls." The distance closed to 100 yards. Blackjack stood motionless, both guns trained on the locomotive cab. 75 yards. 50. At 25 yards, Blackjack dove sideways, rolling behind a boulder as the locomotive thundered past. His shots followed them, punching holes in the tender and freight cars. "We made it," the engineer breathed. But Rip was already looking back toward the canyon, where smoke and gunfire still marked positions on both ridges. Morrison and Billy were holding their own, but Blackjack's surviving men would soon realize the train had escaped. "How far to the next station?" Rip asked. 10 miles. Little place called Cedar Flats." "Telegraph?" "Yes, sir. Direct line to Fort Worth." "Then that's where we're heading. Fast as this engine will carry us." Behind them, Devil's Canyon fell away into dust and distance. But Rip knew the fight wasn't over. Blackjack didn't give up easy. Martha Sue pressed herself against the tunnel wall as boots echoed in the darkness ahead. Clem was coming back, and she was trapped 50 yards from the locomotive with a stick of dynamite and a growing certainty that she was about to die. The fuse felt slippery in her sweating hands. Doc's instructions echoed in her memory. Stick it in the powder, light it, run like hell. "Simple as lighting a candle," he'd said. Except candles didn't blow up and kill people. "I know you're in here, lady." Clem's voice bounced off stone walls, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Heard you moving around. Heard that old drunk talking." Martha Sue crept forward, feeling for the railroad tracks with her feet. The steel rails would guide her to the right spot. 50 yards from the locomotive, Doc had said. Far enough to wreck the engine without bringing down the tunnel roof. "Found something interesting back there," Clem continued, his voice closer now. "Old man's still breathing, if you can call it that. Keeps asking for you. Keeps saying your name." She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Doc was alive but hurt bad. Every instinct screamed at her to go back, to help him, to comfort him in his final moments. But his sacrifice would mean nothing if Blackjack escaped with that locomotive. Her boot touched something soft. She knelt and felt along the ground. Railroad ties, wooden and solid. The tracks. She began counting her steps, moving away from the cavern where Doc lay bleeding. 10 steps, 20, 30. "You know what I'm going to do to that old drunk?" Clem's voice was right behind her now. "I'm going to make him watch while I do things to you. Things that'll make you beg for death." 40 steps. 50. Martha Sue knelt between the rails and fumbled for her matches. The dynamite felt heavy as a tombstone in her other hand. One stick to stop a locomotive. One stick to end Blackjack's plan. One stick to make her father's death mean something. The match flared, illuminating the tunnel in hellish red light. Clem stood 20 feet away, rifle aimed at her heart, his scarecrow face split by a death's head grin. "Drop it. Go to hell. After you, lady." The match touched the fuse. It sparked to life, hissing and spitting as flame raced toward the powder. Martha Sue dove sideways as Clem's rifle boomed, the bullet chipping stone where she'd been kneeling. She rolled behind a support timber as his second shot splintered wood above her head. The fuse burned steadily, eating up the distance to the dynamite with terrifying speed. "You crazy bitch! You'll bring down the whole tunnel!" Martha Sue pulled out her Derringer. 2 shots, close range only, but better than nothing. "That's the idea!" Clem was moving toward the burning fuse, probably planning to stamp it out or pull it from the powder. She couldn't let him reach it, couldn't let Blackjack escape to rob and kill again. She stepped into the tunnel, Derringer extended. "Stop right there." Clem spun toward her, working his rifle's lever action. The metallic clack echoed like breaking bones. 20 feet between them. Too far for her Derringer, perfect range for his Winchester. The fuse hissed louder, almost to the dynamite now. Maybe 30 seconds left, maybe 20. "You pull that trigger, you die too," Clem said. "I know." Something in her voice made him hesitate. In that moment of uncertainty, she saw her father's face in her memory. Kind eyes, gentle hands, the stubborn courage that had gotten him killed for doing what was right. She pulled the trigger. The Derringer bucked in her hand. Clem staggered backward, clutching his chest, rifle forgotten. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark in the fuse's flickering light. "Didn't think you had it in you," he gasped. "Neither did I." She turned and ran toward the cavern, toward Doc Henley and whatever safety she could find. Behind her, the fuse reached its destination with a sound like an angry snake. The explosion lifted her off her feet and slammed her against the tunnel wall. Stone fragments filled the air like deadly rain. The locomotive's whistle screamed as twisted metal met compressed steam. Then darkness swallowed everything. Martha Sue crawled through dust and debris toward a faint light ahead. Doc's lantern still burning in the cavern. She found him propped against the locomotive's cowcatcher, rifle across his knees, eyes closed. "Doc?" He opened his eyes and smiled. Blood had stopped flowing from his chest wound. Never a good sign. "Did it work?" Martha Sue looked back toward the tunnel mouth. Where railroad tracks had gleamed, now only twisted steel and broken stone remained. No locomotive would ever leave this cavern again. It worked. "Good girl! Your daddy would be proud." "Don't talk. Save your strength." "For what?" Doc's laugh turned into a cough. "I'm dying, Martha Sue. Have been since that bastard shot me. At least I got to see you send his plan straight to hell." Through the cavern opening, she could hear distant gunfire. "Tell Campbell." Doc's voice was fading. "Tell him the surgery was successful. Patient's going to live." His eyes closed for the final time. Martha Sue sat beside him in the flickering lantern light, holding his hand while the sounds of war echoed through Devil's Canyon. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away shadows and lies alike. Black Jack Donovan rode into trouble like the devil himself, his black stallion lathered with sweat and foam. Only 3 men rode behind him now, the survivors of Devil's Canyon, their faces grim with failure and rage. Main Street lay empty except for dust devils and the spotted dog that trotted toward the lucky dollar with its tongue hanging out. Every window shutter was closed, every door barred. The town held its breath like a man waiting for the hangman's noose. Blackjack dismounted in front of the saloon and kicked open the batwing doors. The lucky dollar stood empty, chairs overturned, broken glass crunching under his boots. Behind the bar, bottles lay smashed and spilled, their contents forming dark pools on the floor. "Martha Sue!" His voice echoed through the empty building. "I know you're here somewhere, darling. Time we had a talk." No answer except the creaking of old wood and the whisper of wind through broken windows. One of his men, a stocky Mexican named Valdez, spat tobacco juice into the sawdust. "Maybe she ran, Jefe, like smart people do." "Martha Sue's not smart. She's stubborn, like her old man was." Blackjack's pale eyes scanned the saloon, noting details his men missed. Fresh blood on the floor, boot prints leading to the back door. Someone was here recent. They followed the trail through the kitchen and out into the alley. More drops of blood led toward the abandoned telegraph office, then stopped at a storm drain grating. "Tunnels," Valdez said. "The whole town's connected underground." "I know." Blackjack drew his gun and checked the cylinder. "Seen the maps in the surveyor's office. Question is where they lead." A gunshot cracked from the direction of the railroad depot. Then another. Blackjack smiled, the first genuine expression he'd worn since the train escaped Devil's Canyon. "Sounds like our guests are back." They mounted up and rode toward the depot, where smoke still rose from the previous night's explosion. Two figures moved among the ruins, Morrison and Billy Crenshaw, searching through debris for anything useful. "Well, well," Blackjack called. "If it isn't the famous Sam Morrison. Heard you let my train get away." Morrison straightened, rifle in his hands. "Your train's safe in Cedar Flats, Donovan, along with every dollar you plan to steal." "Plans change. Setbacks happen. Smart men adapt." "You calling yourself smart?" "Smart enough to know when I'm beat." Blackjack's voice carried across the ruins like a funeral bell. "Smart enough to cut my losses and disappear. But first I got some personal business to settle." Billy stepped closer to Morrison, his young face set with determination. The boy held a rifle almost as tall as himself, but his grip looked steady enough. "Let the kid go," Morrison said. "This is between you and me." "No, it ain't." Blackjack dismounted again, his men spreading out to flank the depot ruins. "This is between me and everyone who cost me $50,000 and the best plan I ever devised." "Your plan failed because you're a killer and a thief. Nothing more." "Maybe so. But I'm a killer and thief who's still breathing, while some folks ain't." Blackjack's smile turned cruel. "Your friend Campbell, for instance. Heard he had an accident back at the canyon." Morrison's jaw tightened. "What kind of accident?" "The permanent kind. Rock slide's a terrible thing. Crushes a man flat, leaves nothing but meat and bones for the buzzards." Billy raised his rifle, but Morrison touched his shoulder. "Easy, son. He's lying." "Am I? How else would I know about them limestone cliffs above Devil's Bend? How else would I know your partner was fool enough to climb them rocks during a gunfight?" The words hit Morrison like physical blows. He'd seen Rip scrambling up those cliffs during the battle, trying to get above the Outlaws' positions. If there'd been a rock slide— "You're lying," he repeated, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "Ask the boy. He was there. Saw it happen." All eyes turned to Billy Crenshaw. The 10-year-old's face was pale, but his voice stayed steady. "I didn't see no rock slide. Saw Mr. Campbell get on that train and ride it right past your nose." Blackjack's smile faltered. "Kid's got a good imagination." "Kid's telling the truth. Something you wouldn't recognize if it bit you on the ass." The voice came from behind the Outlaws. The sun hung directly overhead, burning the dust of Main Street into fine powder that swirled between the two men. Black Jack Donovan stood 50 feet from Rip Campbell, his shadow a dark pool at his boots. "Been looking forward to this," Black Jack said, flexing his fingers near his gun butt. "Always wondered who was faster. Wonder all you want. Won't change the outcome." Around them, trouble held its breath. Window shutters cracked open as townspeople peered out at the confrontation that would determine their future. Morrison and Billy had taken cover behind the depot ruins, rifles ready in case Blackjack's men interfered. But Valdez and the others seemed content to watch. Maybe they'd finally realized their leader's luck had run out. Maybe they were already planning their own escapes into Mexico. "Tell me something, Campbell," Blackjack's voice carried easily across the dusty space between them. Was it worth it? All this death and destruction for a town that ain't worth the powder to blow it up? Every life's worth something. Even yours before you chose to waste it. Philosophical bastard, ain't you? Just tired. Tired of men like you thinking you can take whatever you want? Blackjack laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass in the desert heat. Men like me built this country, took it from the Indians, carved railroads through mountains, made civilization out of wilderness. Men like you destroyed it, turned law into a joke and justice into something you buy at auction. Pretty words. Let's see if your gun's as fast as your mouth. The street fell silent except for the whisper of wind through broken buildings. A tumbleweed rolled between them, pushed by desert air that smelled of sage and sand. Rip's hand hung loose near his Colt. 20 years of gunfights had taught him patience. Blackjack was younger, maybe faster on the draw, but speed meant nothing without accuracy. And accuracy came from staying calm when death whispered in your ear. You killed good people in this town, Rip said. Martha Sue's father, Doc Henley, probably others. Doc Henley's dead? The surprise in Blackjack's voice was genuine. For a moment, his mask slipped, revealing something almost human underneath the killer's facade. Died stopping your escape train. Went out fighting like a man should. Blackjack's pale eyes flickered. Old drunk had more sand than I figured. More sand than you'll ever have. We'll see about that. The moment stretched like a bowstring under tension. Rip counted heartbeats, measured breathing, felt sweat trickle down his spine despite the dry heat. Everything narrowed to this single point in time. 2 men, 2 guns, and 20 years of bad history about to settle itself in lead and powder smoke. Blackjack's hand moved first. The draw was smooth, professional, practiced 10,000 times in front of mirrors and whiskey bottles. His Colt cleared leather like lightning, barrels swinging toward Rip's chest. But Rip was already in motion, muscle memory and instinct guiding him through movements honed by decades of survival. His gun appeared in his hand as if by magic, hammer cocking, barrel aligning. 2 shots cracked as one, echoing off the buildings like thunder. Dust puffed from the street where bullets struck. Gunsmoke drifted between them, acrid and thick. Blackjack stood motionless for a heartbeat, his smoking gun extended. Then he looked down at the spreading red stain on his vest, surprise replacing confidence in his pale eyes. Well, I'll be damned. His knees buckled. The gun fell from nerveless fingers, hitting the dust with a soft thud. He toppled sideways, landing hard in the street that had seen too much blood already. Rip walked over and knelt beside him. Blackjack's breathing was shallow, labored. Blood frothed on his lips. How? The dying man whispered. You aimed where I was. I aimed where you were going to be. Blackjack coughed, spattering blood on his shirt front. Always were. Smarter than you looked. Smart enough to know when a man's done. This ain't over. Got friends in Mexico. They'll come looking. Let them come. Won't find anything but graves and ghosts. Blackjack's eyes fixed on something beyond Rip's shoulder. Maybe the sky, maybe eternity, maybe just the meaningless blue of a Texas afternoon. His breath rattled once in his throat, then stopped. Rip stood and holstered his gun. Around him, the town began to stir. Doors opened. People emerged into sunlight they'd been afraid to see. Morrison appeared at his side, Billy close behind. Clean shooting? Clean enough. Valdez and the remaining outlaws were already mounting their horses, eager to put distance between themselves and a town that had suddenly become very unhealthy for their kind. Let them go? Morrison asked. Rip watched the survivors disappear into the heat shimmer beyond town. They're finished. Without Blackjack, they're just ordinary thieves and drifters. Nothing the local law can't handle. Billy looked down at Blackjack's body, then up at Rip. Is it really over? For him, it is. For the rest of us, it's just beginning. Martha Sue emerged from the Lucky Dollar, her red hair catching sunlight like fire. She walked over to where Blackjack lay and stared down at the man who'd killed her father. "Feel better?" Rip asked. "Feel empty, like part of me died with him." "That's normal. Revenge never fills the hole it's supposed to." She nodded, understanding more than her years should have taught her. "What happens now?" Rip looked around at the town of Trouble. Dusty, broken, but still breathing. "Still alive. Now we rebuild." Martha Sue found Rip sitting on the church steps 3 days after Blackjack died, watching Billy Crenshaw teach his spotted dog to fetch a stick. The boy's laughter carried across Main Street, a sound that had been missing from Trouble for too long. "Dog's getting fat," she said, settling beside him on the worn wooden step. "Boy's been feeding him too much jerky. Billy earned it. We all did." The town was already changing. Fresh lumber lay stacked beside the general store where volunteers were rebuilding the front porch. Someone had painted over the bullet holes in the saloon's false front, and the broken windows sported new glass ordered from Fort Worth. Even the population sign had been repaired, though it now read Trouble Pop 43 in fresh white paint. "Morrison's leaving today," Martha Sue said. "I know. Saw him packing his gear." The railroad detective had finished his investigation, filing reports that would ensure federal charges followed anyone foolish enough to continue Blackjack's operation. 3 outlaws had surrendered in El Paso, claiming they'd been coerced. It might even be true. "He offered you a job." Rip picked up a pebble and tossed it into the street. "Railroad detective work. Good pay, federal backing, chance to travel." "Sounds perfect for a man with your experience." "Maybe." Martha Sue studied his profile. But I'm tired of hunting men. Done enough of it for 3 lifetimes." A wagon creaked past, loaded with supplies from the depot. The driver tipped his hat, a courtesy that would have been unthinkable a week ago when fear ruled the streets. "That cattle deal you mentioned, the one in Fort Worth. Still waiting. Buyers holding the contract another week, seeing as how federal business kept me occupied." "You planning to take it?" Rip watched Billy throw the stick again. The dog bounded after it with tail wagging, happy in the way only dogs could be happy. "Depends." "On what?" "On whether a certain red-headed saloon owner might consider a partnership." Martha Sue went very still. "What kind of partnership? The kind where 2 people who've seen too much ugliness try to build something decent together." He turned to face her, his weathered hands resting on his knees. "I got enough money from that cattle deal to buy good land. Maybe run some beef, plant some crops. Build a house with real windows and a porch where folks can sit evenings." "Sounds lonely." "Wouldn't be, if you were there." The words hung between them like heat shimmer over summer asphalt. Martha Sue felt her chest tighten. Not from fear, but from possibility. "I don't know anything about ranching. I don't know anything about running a saloon. Didn't stop you from asking me to stay." She'd done that yesterday, standing in the Lucky Dollar while he helped her inventory the damage. Asked him to consider settling in Trouble, maybe taking the sheriff's job that Deputy Barnes had offered before riding out to visit his sister in California. "Town needs law," she'd said then. "Needs someone people respect." "Town needs to respect itself first," he'd answered. "Can't do that with outsiders solving all its problems." Billy's dog dropped the stick at Rip's feet, tongue lolling, brown eyes bright with expectation. Rip scratched behind the animal's ears. "What would happen to the Lucky Dollar?" Martha Sue asked. "Sell it. Use the money for ranch supplies. I built that place with my own hands after Papa died. Put everything I had into making it work." "I know. And you did good work. But sometimes a person outgrows the place they built." A dust devil spun down Main Street, lifting scraps of paper and dried leaves in a brief dance before dissolving into nothing. "There's something else," Rip said. "Something you should know before you decide." "What?" "I killed 17 men in my life. Some of them deserved it, some of them didn't, all of them haunt my sleep. That's what you'd be taking on." Martha Sue considered this. How many lives you save? Don't know. Never counted. Start counting. Might find the ledger balances better than you think. Billy ran over, his dog trotting beside him. Mr. Campbell, you really leaving? Thinking about it. Where would you go? Wherever the wind takes me. The boy's face fell. That's what drifters say. You ain't a drifter. What am I then? You're the man who saved our town, the man who stood up to Blackjack when nobody else would. Billy looked at Martha Sue, then back at Rip. My ma used to say home ain't a place, it's people. People who care about you, people you care about. Out of the mouths of babes, Rip smiled despite himself. Your ma was a smart woman. Yes, sir. And she always said when you find your people, you stay with them. Don't matter what else is out there. A train whistle echoed from the depot, the afternoon eastbound, carrying passengers and mail toward Fort Worth, toward the cattle deal that could set him up for life, toward a future that suddenly seemed less certain than it had an hour ago. What do you think, Martha Sue? Am I one of your people? She stood and brushed dust from her dress, green eyes thoughtful. Ask me again in a week, after you've had time to think without bullets flying and buildings exploding? Fair enough. But Rip, yeah, if you decide to stay, we do it right. Real partnership, legal and proper. None of this common law arrangement nonsense. He laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd heard from him since the shooting started. You proposing to me? I'm proposing we see if two broken people can fix each other. Billy grinned. That sounds like proposing to me. The spotted dog barked agreement, or maybe just wanted another stick thrown. Sometimes the simple responses were the best ones. Rip stood and offered Martha Sue his arm. Walk with me to the depot. Want to see Morrison off proper. They strolled down Main Street together, Billy and his dog trailing behind. The afternoon sun slanted through dust motes and possibilities, painting everything golden. At the depot, Morrison stood beside the train with his carpetbag, looking every inch the federal lawman. He shook hands with Rip, nodded respectfully to Martha Sue. Offer stands, he told Rip. Railroad could use a man with your skills and reputation. I'll remember. Don't wait too long. Good opportunities don't last forever. The train whistled again, steam hissing from the locomotive's cylinders. Morrison climbed aboard and found a window seat. As the train pulled away, he raised his hand in farewell, a gesture that somehow felt like a benediction. Think you'll regret not taking that job? Martha Sue asked. Think I'd regret taking it more? They walked back toward town as the sun dropped toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them, the train whistle faded into distance and memory. 1 week, Martha Sue said. 1 week. But Rip Campbell was already making his choice. Had been making it since the moment he'd delivered Maria's baby and seen what decent people could accomplish when they stood together. Some men spent their lives running from their past. Others learned to build their future on top of it. Time to find out which kind of man he really was. Billy's laughter echoed from the church steps, where he was teaching his dog a new trick. The sound carried promise and hope in equal measure. Home ain't a place, the boy's mother had said. It's people. Maybe it was time Rip Campbell found his people and stayed with them. Rip Campbell rode out of trouble at dawn on the 5th day, when the morning air still carried the desert's nighttime chill. Martha Sue stood on the Lucky Dollar's porch, coffee cup in her hands, watching him load his saddlebags on Molly's back. The mare had heeled clean, favoring that leg only when the weather turned. Thought you'd decided, she said. Did decide. This is part of it. Billy Crenshaw emerged from the shadows beside the saloon, his spotted dog at his heels. The boy looked older than his 10 years in the gray pre-dawn light. You coming back? Plan to. When? When I'm finished with what I started. Rip swung into the saddle and looked down at them, the red-headed saloon owner, who'd kept records when courage was in short supply, and the boy who'd guided them through storm drains and stood his ground against killers. That cattle deal's still waiting, he said. Buyer's holding the contract through week's end. Figure I owe him the courtesy of a face-to-face conversation. Could send a telegram, Martha Sue said. Could, but some things require looking a man in the eye. The truth was more complicated, though he couldn't explain it properly even to himself. Something about the events in Trouble had changed him, shifted something fundamental in his understanding of what mattered. He needed time to think, to ride alone through country that demanded nothing but attention to staying alive. Besides, he added, gotta pick up supplies. If we're starting a ranch, we'll need more than good intentions and borrowed tools. Martha Sue set down her coffee cup. We? You? Me? Maybe that boy if his mother agrees and he wants to learn the business? Billy's face lit up like sunrise. You mean it? Mean it. Ranch needs hands, and hands need teaching. Long as you understand it's hard work for small pay. Don't care about pay. Care about having something to do that matters. Rip touched his hat brim. See you in a week. He rode north through red rock country as the sun climbed higher, following the same trail that had brought him to Trouble, but traveling it with different eyes. The landscape hadn't changed. Still the same broken mesas and thorny scrub. Still the same heat that would scorch a man's lungs by midday. But now he saw possibilities where before he'd seen only obstacles. Water sources that could support cattle. Grass hidden in arroyos that the casual observer missed. Natural windbreaks where buildings could shelter from the worst storms. Ranch country, if a man knew how to read it. Molly picked her way carefully over loose stone, ears forward, alert for the prairie dog holes that had started this whole adventure. Amazing how one stumble could change everything. If the mare hadn't gone lame, he'd have ridden straight through Trouble without stopping. Maria's baby would have died. Blackjack would have robbed that train and disappeared into Mexico with enough gold to finance an army. Good people would have continued living in fear while corruption wore a badge and called itself law. All because a horse stepped wrong at exactly the right moment. By noon, he'd covered 15 miles, the town of Trouble nothing but a dust smudge behind him. The Fort Worth road stretched ahead like a promise, carrying him toward a meeting that would determine how the rest of his life played out. He stopped at a waterhole to rest the mare and eat some of the jerky Martha Sue had packed. While Molly drank, he pulled out the telegram that had arrived yesterday, response to a wire he'd sent from the depot. Contract still valid, stop buyer willing to negotiate terms. Stop bring bank draft or cash. Stop no personal checks. Stop Jameson. Frank Jameson, cattle broker and middleman for Eastern beef buyers who never got their boots dirty. Rip had dealt with his type before. Men who measured everything in dollars and cents, who saw ranches as numbers on ledger sheets rather than ways of life. But Jameson had what Rip needed. Access to prime cattle at reasonable prices and connections to markets that would pay top dollar for quality beef. The business side of his brain calculated costs. With the money from this deal, he could buy a small spread near good water, stock it with breeding cattle, maybe hire a hand or two. In 5 years, with luck and hard work, he'd have built something substantial, something worth passing on. The personal side wondered if he was fooling himself. Could a man who'd spent 30 years riding alone really settle into domestic life? Could someone who'd killed so many men learn to build instead of destroy? Martha Sue seemed to think so. More importantly, Billy Crenshaw seemed to think so. The boy's faith carried weight that surprised him. Rip folded the telegram and mounted up. Fort Worth lay another day's ride north, but he had time to think. Time to decide exactly what kind of future he wanted to build. The afternoon heat pressed down like a blacksmith's hammer. Molly's hooves kicked up dust that hung in the still air, marking their passage across country that had seen too much violence and too little hope. But hope was like water in the desert, precious, sustaining, worth fighting for when you found it. Miles passed beneath them. The sun tracked across a sky the color of hammered brass. Rip's shadow shortened, then began to lengthen as the day wore toward evening. Somewhere ahead, Fort Worth waited with its cattle pens and business districts, its legitimate opportunities and civilized dangers. Behind him, trouble waited with its broken buildings and uncertain future, its people who'd learned to stand together when standing alone meant dying. Between the two lay the choice that would define everything. The road stretched on, shimmering with heat and possibility.